Hello, my name is Aviva, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a bunch of sports romance book recommendations. So I have made this video once before in the past, I believe about a year ago, but I do have a completely new stack of books to share with you that were not mentioned in that original one. But if you did miss it and you wanted to check it out, I will have a link for it down in the description below. So with that said, let's get started because I have a ton to share with you. So first up, I'm sharing from Look Up With Love by Mariana Zapata. So yes, I have talked about this book a lot on my channel, but I am getting prepared to do a reread of this pretty soon. So I kind of wanted to share it again because it's very much worth the read if you haven't read it yet. So this is a slow burn romance between two figure skaters that very much do not get along. They have known each other more or less their whole life because they've always been training in the same arena. And then at the beginning of this book, for one reason or another, they're going to get paired up to have to compete in the next competition or whatever. So now they're going to be forced to be near each other all the time. And they very much cannot be in the same room together without biting each other's heads off. So there's a lot of that enemies to lovers banter filled tension going on between the two of them, and it is a really good time. It is definitely one of my favorite books by Mariana Zapata, and like I said, I'm going to be rereading this one very soon. So if you have not read this one yet, I highly recommend it because it is a great sports romance. Next, I wanted to share one more Mariana Zapata book that is kind of a little bit of a cop-out because it's not the strongest sports romance that she has ever written, but besides for From Look Up With Love and then the other ones that I've mentioned in the previous video that I made with this theme, this is the only one left that has a sports theme to it. So I really couldn't help myself but mention it, and that is Wait For It. So this is really more of a single parent sort of book. This girl ends up moving into a new home with her two little boys, and she's going to end up falling in love with the next door neighbor that happens to be very grumpy and much older than her. So it's very age gap, grumpy sunshine sort of situation, and it has a single mom sort of thing going on in it, but happens to be one of her two little boys is a baseball player, and he's going to end up joining a team that this neighbor is one of the coaches for. So it does have a sports theme going on in it, especially because there's a lot of moments in this book where they end up going to the field and she's going to be watching a lot of the games. She's going to be sitting in the bleachers, and I feel like it does have a heavy setting of sports, even though it's not necessarily a sports romance. So if you are a fan of baseball and you like slow burn romances and you haven't read this one yet, I definitely recommend giving it a shot because I have now read this book twice and I'm already ready for a third reread of it. Next, I have Waking Olivia by Elizabeth O'Rourke. So this is probably going to end up being one of my favorite reads from this year, and that is really saying something considering I've already read 250 books this year and the year is not yet over. But either way, my point is that if you haven't read this one yet, I highly recommend giving this one a shot. So if you're not familiar, you're basically following this track star who she originally was in a D1 college ready to go to the Olympics, but for one reason or another, well actually a couple of reasons, she ended up getting bumped down to a D3 college, and now she's going to have to start all over on a new team. And when she gets to her new college and everything like that, she's going to end up meeting one of her coaches, and it's going to be their forbidden romance. So the whole thing about this girl though is that she ends up running in her sleep, and she kind of keeps this a secret because it's not very good for her team if she's already doing miles and miles of running before she actually shows up to practice. So she kind of hides this and everything, and she can't really control it. It's kind of like sleepwalking, except she sleep runs. So she'll get to practice the next morning and she's already winded, can't really perform, and that's why it's very much pulling her down and everything like that. And basically at the beginning of the book, the coach realizes that something is actually wrong with her. So he's going to start stepping in, figure out what's wrong, and then try to help her through it. And then happens to be throughout the story, you're going to slowly find out why she is actually running in her sleep. And it is tied to a lot of trauma that had happened in her past. So I definitely do recommend looking up some trigger warnings for this book because it does get a little bit intense at times once she slowly figures out why she actually has this little sleep running issue. But either way, it was such a unique story. I've literally never read anything like this before, and I honestly loved it so freaking much. So I highly recommend giving this one a shot. Next, I have Consider Me by Becca Mack. So this is the first book in a companion series, even though I don't know what the companion series is called, but I am aware that the second book had recently come out, even though I have not read it yet, but I do plan to get to it soon. But my point is that I absolutely loved book one, and I definitely recommend giving it a shot, especially if you're a fan of the off-campus sort of series. If you like those sort of sports romances, I definitely recommend giving this one a shot because I thought that it was a better version of that, if that makes sense. But either way, if you're not familiar with this one, this is one of those I was a player until I met you sort of romances. You're following this guy who's a professional hockey player, and he's also very much an actual player. He sleeps around a lot. And at the beginning of the story, he's going to go to a party. He's going to meet this girl, and this girl is going to turn him down because she's very aware of his reputation, and she's not very interested in that sort of person. And basically, he's going to end up just chasing after her. It's going to be a guy falls first, guy falls harder sort of thing. And it is just a really cute setup, even though it does have a little bit of that classic sort of situation going on. But what I thought was very unique about this this book was how good the communication between these two characters were. Like, at the end of the day, this guy is very much a player. He's never been in a relationship. He doesn't really know how to deal with feelings and like falling for someone in general. And then on the opposite side, this girl is very like uncomfortable with the fact that he has slept with so many people. And even though she likes him and he's being so sweet to her, like, she doesn't really know if this is what she wants. And she's very like, uncomfortable with a lot of things that are going on. So basically they end up like often talking about like how they're feeling and, all of their insecurities and things like that. And that is what I really appreciated about this book specifically. Like, I have never read a better communication sort of thing in a story ever, probably in my life. I loved how much they talked to each other. I loved how open they were like to each other and everything like that. And basically, if that sounds like something up your alley, and in general you are a fan of like I was a player until I met you hockey romances, I 100% recommend giving this one a shot. I'm not saying that it was perfect. There are things that I could critique about it, but I do very much think it was worth the read, and I absolutely loved it when I read it. Next, I have another book that I actually did recently talk about in another one of my videos. I believe it was the last video that I made, but I'm going to mention it again because it is such a good sports romance, and that is Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. So this is technically the first book in a duology. You do have to read the second book, Keeping 13, to get your happily ever after, but if you are willing to commit, because it is a bit of a commitment, it is a very, very thick book. The words are absolutely tiny, and you have to read 2 of them to get to the end of the story, but I very much think it is worth the read. So if you are not familiar with this book, it is basically about this girl who has been very heavily bullied in her previous school. Like, her entire life, she's been in public school and people are always very mean to her. So at the beginning of the story, her parents finally decide that it has been enough. So they basically pull her out and put her into a private school. And on the first day of classes, she basically ends up running into this very popular guy who's like a rugby prodigy, and it's going to end up being their romance. So this is another one of those guy falls first, guy falls harder situations, because at the beginning of the story, he is going to find out why she transferred schools, and basically he's going to end up becoming like very, very protective of her. Like, he's always around the corner, ready to like save the day, ready to make sure that nobody touches her or makes her feel uncomfortable or anything like that. And it was just an adorable, adorable romance. I will say though that this is a very intense romance as well. There is like a laundry list of trigger warnings that go on in this book. Like, she has a lot of family issues. He has a lot of things going on in his personal life. And there is just, it is very heavy on the intensity, if that makes sense. But if you are looking for something like that, where you can basically like literally fall in love with these characters, hang out with them for a very long time, you do have that sports romance aspect because he is a rugby player. And then there's also a lot of really amazing elements going on as well. So if that sounds like it's something up your alley, I 1000% recommend giving this one a shot. Even though it's a commitment, I do think it is very much a commitment that is worth it. Next, I have a football romance called The Wrong Game by Candy Steiner. So this is a standalone about this girl who is recently single and happens to have 2 season tickets to football this year. And she's a very, very big fan. The only thing is that she just got out of a very, very confusing relationship. She was married to a guy that was cheating on her, and he ended up passing away, but basically she never ended up confronting him. So there's like a whole thing going on in like, the prequel of this book. It's like one chapter, you find it all out. But basically the point is that she is not very interested in dating at the moment, but she has these 2 season tickets and she really wants to utilize them. So what she decides to do is basically take a new guy to every single game, just so that she could have somebody to hang out with, even though it's not actually going to be like a date that's going to last longer than one night, if that makes sense. And basically at the beginning of the book, she's in a bar talking to her friend about this and setting up like one of those online dating profiles so that she could go and find like these guys to bring to her games. And the bartender happens to overhear her, and he offers himself up to go with her to the first game. And happens to be, they kind of like got really like well along in the beginning of the like right when they had met and everything like that. So she's like, you know what, this is easier than finding a random guy online. Sure, I will take you. And it happens to be, they go to the first game, obviously have an amazing time, and she's ready to say goodbye to him because like that is the thing that she had told herself she would do. She's like, I'm not taking somebody out on a second date, except he doesn't really want to hear that because he really liked her. So the story is kind of going to be another one of those guy falls first, guy falls harder situations where he's going to chase after her and try to convince her to take him out on another date, if that makes sense. So it has a really cute like setup for the story, and honestly he was such a sweet guy, and I just thought that it was a very unique setup for a book. So if you do like football romances, this is definitely one that you should check out because it is very, very, very heavy on the football scene, because like literally like every other chapter or whatever, she's going to another game, they're kind of hanging out in that football scene and everything like that. So if that sounds like something up your alley, I definitely recommend giving this one a shot. But it happens to be, if you don't want to read that one, I do have another football romance to share with you, which is The Marriage Effect by Carla Sorensen. So this is the third book in her Washington Wolves companion series, I believe. I had read the first book in the series and I didn't love it as much. I had skipped the second one, and then the third one I did end up giving 5 stars. So this is a marriage of convenience between a model or an ex-model. I don't remember where she is in her career, but either way, it's an arranged marriage between a model and then a professional football player. Basically, she has to get married to be able to inherit a lot of money from somebody that had left her with that one clause, like you have to marry to be able to get it. And then on his end, he is the guardian to his 4 little sisters, and his brother is currently trying to take them all away from him. So he basically has to get married to show the course that he kind of has like a stable home environment or something like that. So basically that is how they're going to get themselves into that arranged marriage situation. And then obviously they're going to end up falling for each other. So honestly, it was a really, really good marriage of convenience, arranged marriage, whatever it's called. It was a really good one of those books. It was very quick, easy read. And why I absolutely loved this, well, besides for the actual romance and everything like that, was because of the 4 little kids. I had already known reading this book that they had gotten their own like companion series after that called the Ward Sisters companion series, and I was very interested in that series. So just getting to know all of the kids in this book really helped me fall in love with them for the books that they got after, which happens to be Focused, Faked, and then Forbidden. So this is the first book in the companion series about the kids. It kind of starts taking place 9 years later, because it happens to be in this book you get to meet Molly, who is the main character in this book. And in this story, she ends up at one point going through her next door neighbor's window and ends up making out with him because he is like a football college player at the time. Like he's about to be drafted or something like that. And she always had a really big crush on him. So one day she basically makes a move, and then he almost gets in trouble because she was underage at the time. So basically after that, they end up moving away, and he decides that he is going to completely focus on the game and kind of like, swear off women, because he almost like lost his entire career because of this girl named Molly. So now it is 9 years later, and now we have Molly and Noah's story, and he's now a professional football player, and basically he's basically celibate because all he cares about is football since everything went down with Molly all that time ago. And at the beginning of the book, he's going to end up getting traded to the Washington Wolves team, which is the team that we originally meet in this series. And basically Molly is now working there, and they're going to end up getting set up where they're going to have to be working on a project together. So it's like a forced proximity sort of situation, and he wants absolutely nothing to do with her because of their past, and she's basically indifferent about him, but like, it's her job, so like whatever. And he's obviously going to slowly fall in love with her. So I just really, really, really liked this story, and I definitely recommend reading this one first if you are going to read this one, but you don't technically have to. Like, you can read this one without reading this one, but this one was a 5 stars as well, and this one was a 5 star, so no reason to not start here if you are planning to read this one. So sorry for making that extremely confusing, but we can move on from that. I also did want to share with you the other books in the War Sisters companion series, which are technically like complete standalones, but you originally met these kids like in the other book. But whatever, let's not make this more confusing than it has to be. My point is that book 2 in the War Sisters companion series is about a professional snowboarder, and it does have a little bit of a fake dating scenario going on. So this girl is one of twins, like, you meet them originally in The Marriage Effect, and basically she has always had a crush on her twin's best friend. And one night her twin basically asks her if she can fill in for her to basically go to like this event with her best friend, which is the guy that she had a crush on. So that does sound more confusing than it has to be, but basically this girl has always had a crush on this guy, and she's getting the opportunity to pretend to be her twin sister to be able to go out on a date with him and spend some time with him. So she's like, yeah, sure, I will do it. And then happens to be when she gets ready and everything like that, she goes down to meet this guy that she has a crush on, and his older brother ends up showing up, and it's going to end up being their romance. And it does end up turning into a little bit of a fake dating scenario, and he happens to be a professional snowboarder, and he's kind of like the bad boy sort of situation. Like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but he's got tattoos. His family doesn't really he doesn't very much get along with his family, so it's kind of got that rugged sort of feel to it. And basically there's just a lot of really good stuff going on in this book. There's a lot of forced proximity. There's a moment where they get stuck in the snow and they're gonna have to share a cabin and everything like that. So I don't really want to spoil any of the book for you, but basically this is a really good time, another quick, short, easy read, and it definitely does have that sports feeling to it, even though it's not as heavy as the other 2 books by Carla Sorensen that I had shared with you, where those are very heavy on football. This is kind of just like, he is a pro snowboarder, and you do get a lot of those vibes throughout the story, but they're not necessarily like going snowboarding every second. But either way, very good book, definitely recommend reading it. And lastly, before I move on from Carla Sorensen, I did also want to share Forbidden, which is the last book in the War Sisters Companion series. So this is about an ex-MMA fighter who happens to be a single parent. He is a widow. His wife had died. And at the beginning of the story, he's going to end up buying this gym, like this MMA boxing sort of gym. And this girl is the manager there. And it's going to obviously end up being their romance. So this does have an age gap to it. I believe that like it's a 10-year age gap or something like that. But I absolutely love this. Like from all four of these books, I believe that this one is my favorite. This is actually the only one that I have reread so far, even though I definitely would reread any of these, but this is the first one that I had reread out of all four, so take from that what you will. But either way, this is a really, really good romance. There's a lot of really good stuff going on, and it happens to be because it has that like boxing gym setting, you really do get a lot of that sport feel to it, because they're always like, you know, in the middle of classes or boxing, and he's an ex-MMA fighter, so there's a lot of that stuff going on, and I definitely recommend reading this one if you have not yet. I also wanted to share with you another author in general. Like I kind of like, you know, shared with you Carla Sorensen. A lot of her books are very sports heavy. And then it happens to be Elsie Silver has a very sports heavy sort of vibe to her as well. So she currently has the Gold Rush Ranch companion series, and then she has the Chestnut Springs companion series. So this is a collection of 4 books where you're basically following different romances in each book. They kind of all connect because all of the main characters are like friends or acquaintances or things like that. And they all take place on horse ranches. So like in this first book, it's kind of like a boss employee sort of situation, and they're on a horse ranch, and you basically get a lot of that horse racing sort of vibes to it. And then like each book basically has a horse ranch setting with a different sort of thing. Like book 2 is kind of about one of the jockeys that you meet in book 1. Like she is literally like a horse racer, and it's going to end up being like, you know, a romance with another one of the owners of this horse ranch. And then book 3, I believe, is like a fake dating scenario, and book 4 is like an age gap, a brother's best friend sort of thing. But either way, all of them does have that sports-ish feel to it, but in like a horse racing setting. I will say that book 1 and book 2 is the most heavy on the sports sort of vibe, but if you end up liking them, all 4 books in this series is generally like a really, really good time, and I definitely would recommend all of them. But I will say, like for sports specifically, really just book 1 and book 2 I am talking about. But either way, she also does have, you know, the Chestnut Springs series, which is more of like a cowboy rodeo sort of vibe. And I did recently read book 2, and I will say that that's not very heavy on the sports, but it did have a couple of moments where they do like these rodeo sort of things. I don't know exactly what they were called, but either way, I believe that this guy is like a professional bull rider, and basically like you end up getting a lot of scenes where he's going to be riding bulls and like things along those lines. And this story is more or less about this girl who is a PR manager of sorts, and she's going to have to make sure that he stays in line because he recently like messed up one of his like what is it called, like when he has like an advertisement with a company, like he messed up one of his like partnerships with a company because he did it or said something stupid or anything like that. But he is like this professional bull rider, so she's going to have to make sure that he stays in line. So this one specifically does have that like forced proximity sort of situation while they're going on tour, going to all these different stops while he's competing and everything like that. So it does have a very unique, different sort of, you know, sports vibe to it. I feel like usually when you read sports romance, it's all like football or baseball or soccer or things along those lines. And this one is like bull riding with cowboys. But either way, it's different, but it still is a sport, and it is a pretty solid time. So definitely recommend checking out Elsie Silver in general if you wanted a little bit of that smaller town Western sort of feel to your sports romances. But anyway, after that, I also wanted to share with you another boxing romance, because Forbidden was a boxing romance, like the last one in the War Sisters companion series by Carla Sorensen. Well, this one is another boxing romance that is I believe another fake dating scenario. So this is Outmatched by Kristen Callahan and Samantha Young, and it's basically a boxer, a geek, a deal that's below the belt. That is so corny, but either way, in this book, you're following this guy who I think he's either an ex-MMA fighter, like an ex-boxer, or he is currently a boxer. And I feel bad. I should have looked this up before I started this video, but I read this one so long ago and I cannot remember the details. But for one reason or another, these two people end up fake dating, and obviously they're gonna end up falling in love. And I feel bad that I cannot remember a lot about this book, but I do remember enjoying it when I read it. So I definitely would recommend looking into it a little bit more if you are into sports romances, you like fake dating, and you know, you haven't read this one yet. So that is that. But anyway, after that, I only have, I think, 3 more books to share with you. I know we've been here for a while, but we are going to get through it till the end. So next up, I have Bad Boys Break Hearts by Michaela Schmelzer. I feel like I'm saying the author's name wrong, and I apologize if I am. But either way, this is a baseball college romance. You're following these 2 people who had known each other as children. They were very, very close as children. And then one day, this girl ends up moving away, never really said goodbye to, like, you know, her best friend that lived next door to her. And basically, they end up bumping into each other again in college while she is actually walking out of his like best friend or roommate or whatever it is bedroom, and like they basically bump into each other and they're like, I know you from my past. And it's like a very awkward situation. He kind of gets very mad at her for like, you know, just the situation that they're in at the beginning of the story, and then obviously it's going to end up being their romance. So again, I did read this book a very, very long time ago, but I do remember it being a pretty solid college baseball romance when I read it. So if you haven't read this one yet, I definitely recommend looking into it a little bit more, and I apologize that I couldn't give you any more information, but my mistake for not rereading, you know, the back of the book and everything like that before I actually started this video. So it is what it is. But anyway, after that, I have two more books. One is Dear Ava by Alameda Mills. So I have talked about this book a couple of times on my channel here and there, but it is a football romance, but it is not extremely heavy on the football romance. It is more heavy on the fact that this girl was sexually assaulted at the beginning of the book. So definitely recommend looking up trigger warnings. And the thing is that she was sexually assaulted by a football player, except she doesn't know which football player from her school actually did it to her because she was drugged or something like that. So at the beginning of the book, she ends up going back to school to try and find out who it was that did it to her. And she ends up getting a note in her locker from somebody anonymous saying like, look, I'm on the football team. I didn't do it to you, but I really missed you while you were gone. And I'm very happy that you're back. And I would love to be there for you and be your friends and everything like that. And she's like, sorry, I don't like anybody on the football team. I do not trust a single one of them. So she just like threw the note away. And then happens to be, she's going to go into class and she's going to sit next to the guy that had secretly sent her the note. And in person, they don't very much get along, but he is secretly like pining after her, and it's going to end up being their romance. And obviously slowly throughout the book, she's going to find out who had did it to her and everything like that. So it kind of is a little bit more heavy on like those ideas, but I will say that he is a football player and there is a lot of like football talk in this book because of it. So not the heaviest sports romance that I've recommended to you in this video, but still one that is worth the read nonetheless. And then happens to be after that, I have another book that is a little bit like, you know, of a heavier sort of book, and that is Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. So I wouldn't necessarily categorize this book as a romance because I don't want you going into it thinking that you're going to get this like whirlwind romance, even though you will. Like by the end of the book, you end up getting a happily ever after, you end up getting a really good romance, but it's not majority of a romance story. It is majority about watching this girl be in a very abusive relationship and not knowing how to get out of it for specific reasons. And it happens to be she is dating a professional basketball player, and she's also going to be having a right person, wrong time love story with one of her boyfriend's like rivals or teammates. I don't remember the situation, but either way, there's two professional basketball players in this story, and she's going to end up being in an abusive relationship with one of them, and she's going to end up with one of them. So it is a very heavy book. Definitely recommend looking up trigger warnings. It is not the easiest book to read, and I honestly had a pretty hard time at getting through it, but by the end of it, I was like, oh my God, that book was really, really good, even though it made me very uncomfortable for a very long time. So again, I will say this is not a romance. Do not go into thinking that it is a romance. It's about, let's say, like 20 to 30% of a romance, and then 70% about this girl very much being abused. So, you know, take from that what you will. But either way, if you do like basketball and if you are interested in reading a book like that, then I 100% would recommend giving this one a shot. So that is all that I wanted to share with you. That is a lot of books for one video. So I really do hope that you did end up finding something that you are interested in reading. Feel free to leave me a comment down below if you have read any of these books or if you are down to add any of them to your TBR. I'd love to know. But anyway, if you did enjoy watching this video, then please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you are not currently subscribed. And either way, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video because I really do appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy reading.